So the idea is to create maybe a quick introduction for people starting from now, where we tell people why interoperability is the name of the game, right? And so again, I'll try to do the short version again myself. For me, it's a lot about collaboration, and collaboration is kind of just one end of a number of continui. Like, so you have personal productivity and then collaborative productivity, but then you also have the line from just thinking versus and communicating versus then actually doing things. And for me, all of these doesn't need to be, I mean, it can live on different tools, but then if these different tools live on different websites, and don't have any kind of interoperability, then like it becomes super hard to interface between them. And that's one aspect. The other aspect is maybe the deeper point, is that if we want to have kind of sovereignty over what we do, then we need to be able to control the UIs that we use in a fine-grained way. And these you can only do if you really have access to your own data, like on your device, and then you can build or basically pick and choose if you don't have the technical skills, mix and match the UIs that actually allow you to achieve your goals in a way that actually you can do without having to ask for permission to your peers, which might actually use that data in a completely different way. So sorry, Nathan, maybe you want to go.
Just repeat what I said. Oh. So for me, like peer-to-peer and agent-centric, it goes hand in hand with components and interoperability and microservices. Because the current system within capitalism, everyone's competing against each other because everyone wants to basically try and capture their little slice of the pie, like whether that's users or data or some sort of technology or IP or patents or whatever. So you end up with all these silos and all these people competing against each other. So you'll have like, you know, two projects, and even if they're trying to solve a real problem, like a human, and they've got the best of intentions, like this one's got a name, this one's got a name, and just by nature of how people understand, you know, I guess more by nature of how we're conditioned to do startups and projects, and also our own personal egos and things as well, we tend to just go, cool, I know how, I'm going to go off in this direction, I'm going to go off in this direction, and we both like have our own little internal teams and things, and we just create redundant work, and we don't talk to each other. Or if you do try and talk to each other, you like, you know, usually the talks break down or whatever because you have clashing ideologies about where it wants to go, and so you end up just creating these silos and going off in your own direction. And in a hardcore capitalist world where it's all just about making profit, it's even worse because everyone's just like, cool, silo it, compete, crush your enemies, monopolize everything, try and become the standard. So that people have to pay to get access to the data and the technology you've built. So with peer-to-peer and agent-centric and individual owning their data and having sovereignty over which apps they want to use and, you know, where their data is stored, and even the UI and the backend and everything, then you can kind of componentize everything so everything becomes tiny little, like, I like the analogy of like Lego bricks. So imagine if like project A and project B, yes, they're still independent. They still have their own ideologies as to where they want to go with their project, but they're all sharing like a whole bunch of different little Lego bricks. So maybe this project has, you know, 10,000 Lego bricks make up its entire offering or whatever. And this one has like 5,000 Lego bricks. Maybe between them, they're both sharing 4,000 Lego bricks. And so it allows them to kind of pursue their own direction and in their own independent way. But at the end of the day, they're not really competing in some sense, because it's like they're still sharing the underlying technology that everyone's creating. And if you get to a model where like if this project is a Lego, it's immediately available to everyone else. So if they want to use it, they can. It's not like it's being hoarded in this silo. So that's kind of where I love this ecosystem to get to. But it's like, you know, humans are in the way of that.
Yeah.
I think you're maybe touching on a social issue with that too. Like the act, in my experience, of starting some shared work in the open like that, it's, you know, it's often like you start the thing and you say, I'm going to build this project and I want to do it openly, and everyone goes crickets. And then, maybe 6 months later, when you've got like a heap of work done, someone will have the interest to come in because they can start to see the structure of what you're doing. But yeah, engaging people in cross-project kind of ecosystemic work to begin with and building digital commons is quite difficult, I find. If anyone has thoughts on that problem, I'd be really interested. Otherwise, you're all kind of summing up the things that I would say pretty well, I think. I had a nice conversation with someone the other day, and they were talking about how apps have been sort of the dominant organizing principle for the current internet, and that in the future, what seems to be happening around us, at least, is it looks like it's moving more towards like the neighborhood as being that fundamental building block. And I can give you kind of a real world example of this sort of modularity you're talking about, Nathan. We haven't built it yet, but we're on the way. So there's sort of like an economic container for the project that I'm actually building, which is the economic container, but I digress. And so, there's like a bunch of work and effort tracking that goes in with that. So we have our own little holochain module that does all that stuff. But then that gets plugged into the back end of CoMakery, which is a crypto fund management thing where people are kind of focused on the project specifically and doing payments there. But it also gets embedded into another platform called Investor Engine, which is more about like less about the group, more about people around it and organizing funds to bring in. So like the neighborhood with that is the Holo REA project and the work we're doing, but there's multiple systems and platforms that actually in some senses have competing financial interests, but they're all interested in the same data and seeing what we're doing. So they're all connected. And that's quite an exciting first step along that road, I think.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think everyone summed up. Hang on, am I working?
Yep.
You're working.
Sorry. Yeah, everyone's sort of summed up the main points. But I think just to add, I think when you don't have interoperability, you naturally get services or companies that kind of centralize like those things and become the mediators of interoperability. So like you get like your Google and Facebook and stuff that are supposed to help. Yeah, like they solve that problem, but in a monopolistic way. Yeah, I think it just by sheer like trying to avoid that scenario, enabling things to be, fully sort of flexible and connectable with everything else is kind of cool. So,
yeah, I'm seeing even developers who want to be kind of open. If they build on kind of the normal web, then they have to build an API, which it's always kind of down the line. And so technologies that are peer-to-peer by default, that seems to be kind of a requirement if you don't want to kind of have the wrong incentives in a way. So I'm seeing like the potential for kind of 3 different directions. Maybe all of 3 would be interesting to talk about. I'm just going to name them and maybe someone can just pick one up and run with it. So one would be kind of the lower layer of the stack, which is, okay, what kind of libraries, technologies could we use? I mean, obviously, Holochain is in the room, and GandhiB is one of the ones that I've been talking about. DAT, I think, I haven't been following it. It's interesting. Secure Scuttlebutt, blah, blah, blah. All of these, there is an interesting discussion that could be had about like what is fit for what and how to integrate them and so on. Then there would be an interesting discussion at the higher layer, which is, okay, what kind of components do we actually want? I sense that you are maybe all more experienced in the economical aspects, in economical thinking, money and so on. I'm not sure, but I come more maybe from the productivity and thinking and knowledge management system and collaboration side. But obviously then there is like, it bleeds over to economics at a certain point, maybe when it has to scale especially. I don't know. So these are 2 aspects. And then, I don't know, I personally would also be interested in your kind of your backstory a bit, but maybe that's a bit off topic. Like you as a group, you know each other, so that's interesting too.
Who's gonna bite first?
I think the economics questions kind of pointed at you, Pospi. But yeah.
Is it? I'm an accidental accountant, not a real accountant. Yeah, no, I'll stay away from economics because actually for me, like the economic problems and the coordination problems are the same problems. So that's sort of the space that I'm working in.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, kind of the thing that got us connected, Nick, was the Game B thing that you started. And the thing that was interesting to me about your take was your view on protocol. And when we talk about backend interoperability, pretty much the way I'm looking at it is that protocol and application level protocols in particular is the way of doing that. And what I mean by application level is just that, like there's been a lot of work done, particularly in the blockchain industry, at like a low level kind of technical protocol level to try and marry different blockchains and do like, you know, atomic transactions between Bitcoin and Ethereum and stuff like that. And those kind of integrations, because they're kind of system level integrations, are so technical and complicated and difficult, and like they need a whole bunch of computer scientists to do them, that they're just, to me, completely infeasible for any kind of like scaled interoperability, because it takes 5 years to bind two things together, you know. So I'm working this problem domain works well, and let's try and standardize a schema that we can use across, and that any backend can represent that schema, because it's just going to be a JSON payload at the end of the day. So that's sort of an important one for me, is protocol bindings that don't depend on the underlying technology in any real way, because then you're allowing any underlying technology to bind. So I guess I'm curious, like people's thoughts around that and disagreements or anything.
Yeah.
I guess the ultimate thing there is Scepter, if you want to explain Scepter roughly.
Yeah.
Magic not created a thing that's supposed to solve all that problem. So
Yeah,
any
the
computer
self-describing
protocol can
data
talk to
kind
this.
of thing.
Yeah.
I watched a few of the videos. Yeah. Like this chart that kind of eats, that is this graph that eats itself up and then produces the end result, basically. And then you can plug other things in, and then it's quite interesting. I'm wondering whether, you know, like basically there is only one kind of Turing completeness, right? And I'm wondering whether that's something different. I guess maybe it's an abstraction at a different level. So I don't know about that. Anyway. Yes.
I've heard the term complete. Sorry, just on that. Turing complete means that anything can be computed. It doesn't mean that you can do anything, like as a user or like a human interfacing with that computer. Like, I think we need a better term than Turing complete. Yeah.
Okay.
And for Scepter, just quickly for anyone who's watching who doesn't understand what any of that stuff means, it's kind of like all four of us right now are able to communicate on this one protocol called English. And even though we haven't set up these little, we haven't coded little API frameworks that like decipher when you say cat, like, and it transfers to me, and there's no code. It's just like we're all kind of operating on this same shared protocol of English, and yet we can all compute and communicate quite freely without having to have these kind of, what do you call them, like protocol bridges or like, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's a good analogy, I think.
Maybe another bit of background would be that Scepter is an idea by the creators of Holochain, and it's kind of like down the line. It's like, okay, Holochain is just a step along the way to build the operating system, the new rethunk operating system that would be Scepter, right?
I have a controversial thought that I lead to from this, because actually Scepter is the reason that I got into Holochain, and it's unclear at this stage whether Holochain is going to evolve into Scepter or be superseded by it, such as the nature of emergent design.
Yeah.
But it's the best shot I can see that we have. There's some other similar things. There's one called Atom Space. There's a database called Kraken, which has got some similar power. But they're fundamentally like meaning making systems. And when the reason I got excited is that particularly in blockchain, but in holochain as well, like everywhere, the problem that we haven't really solved as a species, or in computers anyway, is how do we deal with protocol? Like, how do we decide like what is the correct way to speak about organic agriculture and what words should we use? And how do we decide what's the right way to speak about economics? And the REA accounting project that I'm working on, that's been like a 40-year long effort of people debating that protocol to try and decide what the right way of talking about it is. So the promise of Scepter is basically not having to do that protocol work anymore, because it would be a system where there's semantic meaning embedded into every piece of data all the way down to the CPU. And if you've got that, then theoretically you don't have to have these 40-year conversations to figure out what the right language to speak is, because you can just look at the thing and go, oh, I know what language you're speaking exactly, because all the semantics is inherent. That's as I can see that we have actually incented web scuttlebutt about this, walking through like semantic web work things, and he comes in and goes, yeah, I think the semantic web is kind of like it's a big joke and it's never going to work, and like everyone's wasting their time doing this work. And I was like, oh, interesting. And this came from a person with a background in AI, and they're basically saying like this process of people trying to make meaning, we're not very good at. It's never going to work. The only way that the semantic web will ever work is if AI comes in and does all of the semantic processing to make
coordination.
The meaning for us. Yeah. So I actually see that as like I think that's a failure state. I think that's like, if we as humans weren't able to make enough sense, then we can bring in the AI to do it for us. But we're also giving away sovereignty and our higher faculties to the AI in doing that. So to me, it feels like kind of like a dehumanizing conclusion to arrive at. People are nodding. I guess I'm in the right channel.
Sorry, can I go? It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether I'm okay. Maybe the way you put it a bit is that there might be a disagreement between us. Might be the case. I'm not sure about it. Maybe my question is just a completely different one, or let's say it like that. The angle or the way I'm approaching this, which also means I have kind of ignored the other aspects, and therefore I don't have the technical knowledge to actually answer those parts. But the answer, the angle that I'm coming at this with is rapid prototyping, right? It's getting to something that can be used and experimented with by humans as quickly as possible, with not with a big hurdle. And then I'm thinking a lot in terms of concrete use cases, which kind of they are not economical. So I don't know if like modeling money and so on is kind of off my skill level, right? But I'm thinking, for example, social networks and productivity tools and that kind of stuff, right? And in that area, all I need is a minimum viable protocol, right? I don't need kind of the data that I don't need the system that can interpret any kind of data that comes along its way in a useful way, right? I just need to know that the data will have a title and the content, and to be able to display it. And if the data comes with other fields, I can just ignore them, right? Like at the level of detail that I'm working at, this kind of universal protocol language, or I don't know, I'm just trying to come up with a way to describe the thing that I've heard you say. It's like, it doesn't even come up as a question, right? And so if you and I, or we as a group, need to collaborate, and again, admittedly, this is different from millions of people, right? Where you start talking about more like game theory and that kind of thing. And that's where economic accountancy comes in and so on. But if we have to collaborate, all we need to be able to do is, I want my tool to write down my notes, and you want your tool to write down my notes. And then we have to kind of figure out a way that I can use the data that you produce in my tool, right? And without forcing each other to adapt to each other's way of doing things, or way, like, so this is kind of, this is the angle that I'm coming at. And obviously at a certain point there will be a bridge, but maybe we are not at the point where that bridge needs to be created.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
It's a great question. I think so. What I was seeing out of that question is, like something like gun is really easy to use, and maybe like if someone uses if whatever scepter looks like, it will kind of have one way that you are supposed to make scepter protocols, and it'll be like, oh, that looks too scary for me. It looks like a Lisp or something, so. Yeah, it's like people will naturally do this anyway, even if they have absolutely like the highest good faith collaboration, whatever. So how do we deal with that?
I'm not. Yeah, as you say, Nick, I'm not entirely sure whether we are completely in agreement or solely in disagreement about it. To me, the process you're both describing sounds like a natural process of building a protocol in a small community and then going for wider adoption, trying to bridge to neighboring communities and all that stuff. But there is kind of a paradox for me in programming where there's a really great talk called Finding Joy in Programming. It's actually a talk about reason, Facebook's UI framework. But he basically talks about how we have these languages like JavaScript that feel like they're easy to write, and we get a lot of joy from writing them because we sit down and we're like, and we build an app in a day and it's amazing. But it's very much kind of like a false sense of progress because the language is so messy, it allows you to write stuff that's not technically correct and still kind of work, and then you spend the next 8 months fixing bugs kind of thing. Whereas something like Reason or Rust is much more strict, so you get a lot more compiler errors and you feel like an idiot when you're starting and you just bang your head against the compiler, but you wind up with a very quality, robust thing even on your first iteration that is going to last a long time. So it's like there's a thing of rapid prototyping for I just want to prototype and I don't want to maintain it next month, and then there's rapid prototyping for I want a production thing that my community is going to use and I want to keep improving over the years. And it's you want room to be able to innovate in protocol, but you want the way that the protocols you're writing are validated, I think, to be very robust, because otherwise you just end up, I think, with the internet we have today. There's some of you have probably read it. There's this great rant that someone wrote in the late 90s. It's called "To Wash It All Away," and it's just this thing about how much of a mess the browser is and why are we still doing this stuff, and all these things. It's got a little screenshot of Internet Explorer's console and resourced and transferred with MIME type text and HTML, but it interpreted with as type JavaScript, and it's why would you do that? Why would you just ignore what type of thing someone is and interpret it differently? And it's with Facebook Open graph tags and all these things that are kind of protocols, but they're not robust protocols. So what you get is these soft breakages that lead to the internet we have not working very well, and all these things just kind of half working and crapping out and not being. Whereas when you've got a strict protocol and a strict compiler, it just breaks and it either works or it doesn't. And so you kind of prevent yourself from making those little errors as you go.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I have any answers out of all of that, but it's there's definitely a different approach for a different point in a product's life cycle, maybe. I don't know.
I hear your pain and I hear the frustration. I remember the pleasure I had with Haskell at university. I used to call it word of God programming, again, because if it compiles, it's right, it's correct, it will work, otherwise it won't, it just doesn't compile. It means you haven't thought it through, right? It's just, I think, I think in my mind I can hold all those considerations and come down on the other side anyway. And there is this I think this, and it's probably another rant that was just written as a paper. Also, it's this classic paper. I think I linked it to you, Marcus. This is worse is better. Have you ever heard that? It's like this divide has existed for a long time, and it's basically this person saying that the MIT style of doing things, trying to do the right thing, didn't work because they tried to create this perfect operating system, and then it didn't have any applications because people were not able to tinker with it, and on the other hand, you had this very ugly Unix system, and people were able to try stuff on it from the get-go, and C was an ugly language, and now, then you have JavaScript, HTML, TCP, everything. Like, you see where the winners are, right? Like, this is this evolutionary thing. I mean, in a sense, even if you think about nature, that's how it works, right? It just accepts like kind of half-broken things into new tools, and I guess like we have to embrace the messiness.
Yeah, most of the time I prefer to embrace the messiness, but you know, there's one story that doesn't fit that model, and it's Solidity. That's, you know, that was Ethereum going, hey, we should make a language that's really approachable and easy for people, and then the DAO happened because they wrote a language that, you know, was completely full of holes. So, you know, if you're, I guess this is the thing with economics, right? If you're doing stuff with financial services or things, you need really robust code underneath. But yeah, if you're making someone's chat app, you really don't. Huh?
It's a very good point. Maybe, you know, there is a spectrum or something, you know, like from here there is the word of God programming coming down, you know, and we are trying to come up with the like evolutionary building blocks, and maybe we will meet at a certain point.
I think my bargain is to try and do most of my customizability stuff at the UI layer, and create tight enough bindings between the UI and the backend that you can kind of just play with the UI without having to think about data at all. I think there's probably, in terms of an accessibility for contribution, there's like there's a whole body of people, maybe 80% of us like have the skills to know what interfaces do and fiddle with them. And then there's like the 1% of people, a third of the % of people who can do anything that deals with abstract data and stuff. So that's a good enabler for me. Just focusing on UIs.
Yeah, I do see the idea, like, and is kind of one thing I've really come to appreciate about Holochain is the very strict kind of back end. So the idea of like being very clear about what each kind of entry can be and how it's validated and stuff, and then it's like, oh, like this API is fully open for everyone to use, but it's like at some point you're going to have to constrain to these requirements. So you can, like, the human computer interaction can be at whatever sophisticated level you want, but at the end of the day it has to conform to these rules, and just making those rules very clear and like documented. Yeah, I think that solves a lot of problems. But then because you've got a standard backend, people will naturally constrain to that shared language. But yeah, it's not at the same level as Scepter, where it's like you can just speak whatever language. But this is like it's getting people to transform themselves and their interfaces to be able to conform to that. Yeah.
I kind of see like so if you got back end, there's the issue of how do you create like universal like protocols, I guess, so that they compile down, have your kind of backend microservice compile down to some universal or some standard unit that can then like interoperate between other backend protocols. And then you've got your front end where you've got like something like web components, where it's like you've boiled down your front end to the micro unit, which can then also interoperate with other micro units on the front end. And also there's a interoperable layer between the front end and the back end. Yeah, like, do we want to? We were just on front end then. Do we want to discuss a bit about like how? So I know we've all got this idea of like, wouldn't it be cool if you could just have kind of like a no-code front end where you can almost like build your front end in whatever language you want, have it compile down to maybe web components, although a lot of people don't like the idea of web components. And then have them all kind of just like you drop in a comments box, you drop in a like button, you drop in like a whatever, and ideally you could just dump a whole bunch of shit onto the front page and then just be able to drag it around, so no code, and then they all just understand exactly what's going on. They all communicate with each other, and you just say, I want it to link to this data or this backend service, and it just magically like works on the web components on the front end and automatically does the connections in the back end. And maybe even like you could do a reverse model where you go, I want to build an app, and you drag in all the web components, and then it builds the back end for you. So you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
I think I might be able to actually do that second one someday.
Excellent.
It's crazy.
So I don't know if I have to, right? Because I made I made that point in the document that, but I'm sensing kind of maybe I'm wondering whether you sense the price that you're paying for that, for the sandbox, right? That you need to have to ensure that security, and the price from the point at which I'm coming at, which is adoption, is the whole infrastructure that you need to bridge from that to the normal web, right? And the fact that you're thinking in terms of backends, that's for me, that's part of the thing, right? Like you need a backend because you need a sandbox to run the code in exactly the same way in each node and all of that, right? And so on the other hand, I have this GandhiB, which the code runs in the client, and that's it, right? And so I'm saying, like, for me, it's a matter of trade-off. I see a trade-off here, right? And so given that there is a trade-off, the question that comes up is what applications are fit for one thing and what applications are fit for the other thing, right? And so like one example that keeps coming up, or at least in Spring it kept coming up in the Holochain community, was the social network. And for me, you don't need that whole thing to create a social network. In my opinion, you don't need all those validation functions to create a social network. And every time you kind of want to add the feature, what do? You need to kind of like develop patterns to add new applications. Like even if you want to make a patch, you have to either migrate all data. For me, that all of that is not needed if they require, because you don't need that strict data integrity requirement. All you need is that your friend has signed the data that he sent you, right? And if your app is not able to read it, well, then your app will just discard it, and you will ask your friend, what is this garbage? I need another app to see it, right? So, and then you don't pay the price of having that whole infrastructure that you need to bridge to the normal web, right? And you can create an app just in the browser. So maybe I wanted to highlight a bit that there is a trade-off there. There is a price being paid for having this backend that does things in a predictable way.
And so just to be explicit, the trade-off you're talking about is just the complexity of having to install that backend and get it set up.
Well, I mean, you have to learn fucking Rust and shit to make holochain apps,
Yeah, that's all part of it. And plus, you need a company. Either you host your own things, or you need a company that uses like a new untested kind of token, mutual currency. What if that breaks? Like there is a huge stack if you think about the few lines that you need to write an app in GandhiB, right? Like, so this is the thing that's this big contrast that I have in my mind, especially when it comes to adoption, right? Because in the end, you just want to be able to send a link to your users, right? You don't want people to have to install conductors, experimental conductors on their phone or on their laptops to be able to run your application, right? Especially if you want to kind of end users, and so you will need that whole infrastructure or have the expertise to host your own stuff. on the and bridge it to the legacy web. So this is basically my thing, like, okay, there is a price to pay in one or the other side. So which applications are right for which? So, and maybe how can we bridge then from one to the other?
Well, Holo will allow people to access a website regularly without having to install stuff. But I love the idea of using something like Gun for rapid prototyping of front end and testing models and just trying to see what works. And then if you need kind of more like strict kind of logic and validation rules and economic, cryptocurrency and stuff, then transfer that logic. Sorry, you go, Pospi.
The distinctive feature that is lacking in most systems like this that Holochain does have is just the validation rules. And as you say, Nick, it's absolutely true that you don't need that stuff to run a social network. Like Scuttlebutt doesn't have that stuff and it works. But it's also true that if 4chan finds out about Scuttlebutt and decides to mess with them, they're fucked. Like the thing is gone. And that's because there's nothing stopping you from going into Scuttlebutt and just blasting a bunch of data and overloading the network, or so even those kinds of validations that you probably wouldn't think of as validations, but things like what's the maximum payload size, can I upload more than 8 megabytes to this system? Those things, they can be vectors for attack there. But yeah, the thing that Scuttlebutt is lacking that would put it at feature parity with Holochain is an ability to run a callback when data comes into your machine and then to reject it before it gets written to disk. That's the thing that's missing there. And I don't think you can have a system that's immune to attack without that, really. Maybe you have systems where a lot of those restrictions are coded into the protocol and you can't get around them, but then you've got that same problem of being overly prescriptive with your protocol.
What about DAT? What is your sense of where that protocol is going?
It's very cool. I think it's more of a low-level thing that other systems use. There's a platform called wireline.io is the website. Okay. And they, from my limited understanding, it's like Scuttlebutt and Holochain had a baby with that thing.
Okay.
It's got some stuff specifically for all or nothing kind of following people and getting content streams separately to some blog. It's sort of a little more. There's a few different pieces to it, but DAT works really well, but the thing with DAT is that there's some semi-centralized pieces in it. Like when you share a file on DAT, by default, it'll connect to the DAT server pubs and broadcast you there. So there's those sort of discovery pieces. Whereas in Holochain, I think the default with Holochain is going to be quite similar, but Holochain has a Genesis callback that you can override to do whatever network discovery logic you want to do up front. So you can connect to your own server or connect to a cloud peers or whatever it is. I feel like I'm getting kind of off topic with that though.
That's okay. I just wanted to ask, how much time do you have left? Because I am free. I have another couple of hours.
I've got maybe a half hour or so.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
I'm really getting the sense that Holochain kind of caters to, I guess, disillusioned blockchainists, and people.
That was the way they marketed to begin with, for sure.
Yeah. It actually does what blockchain was supposed to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so maybe the question that I would like to ask you is, so what application? It's for sure not the social network for you. What is the application that you envision is going to be made possible by Holochain, and maybe you're working on it to make it possible?
I feel like my answer to this question might go too long. Who wants to go first?
Are you working together?
No.
Okay.
I'm just trying to find an article by Nicholas Luck about I can't remember what it is. But he had a good vision for Holochain, which I subscribe.
Oh, is this like back in 2017 or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. It's Holochain reinventing applications or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is hilariously similar to an Ethereum blog post from early days. Yeah, I mean, my answer is that it's not one app that I'm looking at. I'm building kind of infrastructure level foundational stuff for resource coordination problems. So the eventual goal for that is for it to be a series of network components that all work together that stand on their own.
Yeah.
And so that's very interesting to me because it gives people who are non-technical the power to play with different social architectures just in the way that the network spaces are organized. And just kind of the level of modularization that we're targeting makes it very pluggable in things like, okay, I don't like the way you form agreements, so I take out the agreement module, put in my own. I don't like the way that you do planning, so I can take out the planning module and put in my own. So that's kind of the coolest part of that, I think. But then there's kind of levels of customization at other levels within it. So you can take the code and embed it into your own network code and, you know, do higher order compositions of that functionality and restricted and stuff. And then right down the low layer, just being able to kind of pull pieces out and pick at it as well. But the exciting thing about all of that for me is just having a protocol that has a reasonably widespread adoption that allows different platforms and spaces to interact and have like eco villages sharing resources on regional marketplaces, and people all like, you know, logging their trips to town in and then having a system in a little community that tells them that someone else is going into town today so they don't have to go in and can save fuel, and just all little small scale things that together, when the data starts to be visible and connected, can make a heap of difference, I think.
Yeah. Okay,
Your
that last
ultimate
bit.
goal for REA is like post money.
Post money, yeah.
Post money, yeah.
I
have
maybe explain that.
The
Like
slogan.
when that clicked, I was like, "That's fucking awesome!" Like the idea that like if you account for everything, and suddenly the accounting just becomes your economic model. You don't need monetary transactions. Maybe.
Yeah, it's like everyone can build their own view based on their own values, right? Like, so this one invests more into eco-friendly stuff, I give him a plus X. And you basically can model your own money based on that. Yeah.
And that part of it is not stuff that I'm building, but there's a guy, Siddharth, who founded a company called Sacred Capital, and it's been really interesting getting to know him and his work, because the first conversation we ever had was on the basis of me going, I'm pretty sure the reputation economy is evil and we shouldn't build it, but you want to build it, so let's talk. And so we had that conversation, and like cut to now, and I've realized that actually what Siddharth is building is exactly a vision that I put to consensus in like 2017. But I called it ethics and he calls it reputation, but it's basically the same thing. It's just ways to reduce that data set of all the things that have happened down and say this person's a good person because they don't buy here, or they use less carbon, or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it might actually be his thing that's the more exciting thing about all this.
And he's building on Holochain or not at all?
Yeah. I'll send you the Git book because he's got some sort of technical details there.
Yeah. I had the exact same thought. I messaged man, I think it can go so many evil ways. But like I'm sure he has the best. I can just so many like thinking about like, oh, you might have a reputation for punctuality. I'm like, fuck that. Like I have a little tummy that says Nathan Waters is not punctual. Don't hire him. Don't work with him.
Yeah, I think the glaring
glaring
concern is like when it gets misinterpreted, like when it's actually not a good interpretation, which I think will happen fairly frequently enough to like ruin people's lives. So I don't know. I don't know about this at the moment.
It's worth having a look into. Like he sees it as reputation as deeply contextual and subjective, and he's actually I think wants to make it so that the reputational indicators that you're using are only yours. You can't actually share them with other people, which is something where we differed, because I wanted that to be kind of like a marketplace for people to debate their ethic. Like mine's better than yours, you know.
But it's more
the
like
other part,
you can prove your reputation when necessary. So you could be like,
yeah,
look at this.
yeah.
Okay.
And that's the other part that's interesting about the way he's doing it, is he wants it to be a dialogue between the app developers and the people on the platform. So it's like, if you're in a couch surfing app, they might have built integrations that you can import your past history from Airbnb or from some co-living app or something. So but not every user might want to do that. So then it becomes this thing of like, well, I don't want to use that integration. I want to provide this other one from this other network.
So I have a theory that I want to run by you, because this kind of subject is coming up. I haven't been thinking about all of these since spring, but I had this intuition that this kind of thing could be afford a mechanism to transcend games with perverse incentives. And the idea is this, right? Like, if I have, and it requires a minimum of courage, but then so the idea is this, like, I personally have an incentive to do X, but I think it would be ethical to do Y. And then somehow I managed to find a way to authentically track that I did Y. And then I create kind of probably token is the wrong word, or let's say a form of sacred capital that's associated with that. Right? And as soon as I do that, a new game emerges that people can play by taking on that value, where the incentives are aligned, right? And so for me, that's if then everyone has that power, I kind of see how we can globally overcome games with perverse incentives all the time, just by creating new games that people then, through maybe a network of trust, adopt automatically or opt out if they don't like. But that's the kind, someone at the margin senses, I'm forced, I'm pulled to do something that I find unethical. Instead of doing it, they kind of track that they don't do it. And that becomes then a new incentive, because basically it's just a new token that people can accrue by doing the same action, the same ethical action, right? I don't know. It's just a theory or an intuition.
I think the idea of making visible like when you're actually doing the ethical thing, or the thing that's better for climate change or whatever, like doing one of those things and then having people around you who can see that, and then then they are incented to try to do the ethical thing by supporting you, because you're being a good person in the world or something, and then it's like it can kind of be an upward spiral there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it also sounds like value signaling, so I don't know if if maybe it's wrong.
But I guess the idea is to deeply integrate it with lots of different measures and sort of the measurements of outcomes, like actual outcomes, and stuff like that. Yeah, like you want it to be as empirical as you can. Yeah.
This has been a big topic for me lately. Sort of trying to put some ethics and governance around this group that I'm forming. There's a really great thread in the Commons Engine currency design workshops about it, which I hope they make public at some point. But and because the work that I'm doing is kind of building new measurement infrastructure, and so this question of what do you measure, and the repercussions that measuring things has when it changes people's behavior are really important.
Yeah, that's a big topic. Yeah.
And which is essentially what you're talking about, right? Like, because as soon as you make this thing visible, it creates this new set of actions around it. And
it cheapens it, right?
Well, sometimes. This guy Sam Rose told me this story recently about a logistics network he did a pilot with, and they basically just created a system that tracked where all the vehicles were moving, and just by making that visible, suddenly people started optimizing and going like, well, I'm already coming back on this route, and you don't, I can just pick up the grain and blah blah. So, and it led to like a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions just from doing that. Cool. And then they, okay, next iteration, what else can we track? Oh, let's track like what we're spending on fuel. So they track what they're spending on fuel, and suddenly greenhouse emissions start to climb back up again, because now people are just optimizing to save cash and optimizing to save distance. So So there's these,
So,
these like
Interesting.
really subtle things that change it. Yeah.
I
Sorry,
would
my
add a
laptop's
piece
about
to
to
the
die.
puzzle there. It's really interesting. So there is a bit of a perhaps counter-narrative story, but I guess it's just points to how skillful we have to be with these things. So there was a university it was a school in Israel where kind of parents tended to come 10 minutes late to pick up their kids, right? And so they they did a control study, right? And so in one group they introduced a fine, right? And what happened is that even more parents started coming more late, right? Because suddenly it became okay to come late because you just pay the fine. But the cool thing is, once they said, okay, this is not a good idea and removed the fine, people still came late. So they were not able to recover the culture that was previously there. So incentives can destroy a culture. That's the takeaway. And so one needs to be careful about that too. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, in the
there's
end, we are
similar
not...
stuff.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's
There's
terrifying thought.
the similar stuff with creativity. Like if you get kids to just create like drawings and stuff, they'll make like really great drawings and it's like super interesting. But then when you introduce an incentive for like a reward system for like a competition, like whoever can make the best drawing or whatever, like all the drawings change, and then and then if you remove that again, the same thing happens. It's like the drawings are so much worse, and it's super weird. Yeah,
which makes one wonder
it's
how much
people are
we
like more in
destroy
tune with their natural creativity. Yeah.
I kind of want to just call out something in particular on this, because what you just said makes me deeply uneasy and terrified, I have to say. I don't think I've heard it put quite so clearly and bluntly before. Which are just, in the game B world in particular, like here's us having this conversation for, I don't know your gender identities, but for ostensibly white Anglo-Saxon guys talking about this stuff. So yeah, it's when these are the consequences for failure, and when from time to time this work involves, engaging with marginalized people and indigenous people and things, that's particularly hairy. And I've been trying to sort of set a lot of ground rules and guidelines for behavior to prevent cultural erasure with this stuff, because especially it was sparked by this Maori guy at D-Web coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I've been interested in your work, I want to talk about." And I was like, "Oh shit, what do I do?" Like, the work that I'm involved with, this is like, Western colonial kind of school of thought that's been running for 40 years in, universities in the West. Like, how do I have this conversation with you without polluting your head with all of the worldview that I've picked up in doing this work? And the best I really have at the moment is just setting ground rules of like, solicit people's input and ask them what they want to do before talking about your work and your protocol and things like that. But yeah, that's a bigger conversation I want to keep going, of like making sure that we're adequately prepared to engage in those sorts of projects.
Yeah. It's a very good point.
It also has occurred to me recently on that topic that there's actually Nora Bateson said this thing that at the New Economy conference this year in Perth that really stood out to me, because I've been sort of having this tension between, okay, I'm using scientific reductionism to try and recreate a rich picture of reality, and like for people to use that as a way of communicating to the establishment that these are some changes we should make, and here's some evidence that you can understand to do that. But the risk in that work is that it's a preconception that you have to fight very hard against, even in myself, like the notion that there's a solution, that there's like a thing that we can build that will fix everything. And Nora was like, yeah, we've already tried the one size fits all solution. It's called colonialism. It doesn't work. So like, in as much as the technical work is important, what's actually the most important thing, I think, is just the act of first acknowledging natural ecosystems and kind of embedding yourself within them again, but also creating social ecosystems. Like, that's the embodied practice that the real change will come from, is that process of renewing relationships in a deeper way than just financial, and actually building interdependence between people in your own life. And the more I get into this work, the more I'm pushed to do that naturally. So it feels very in alignment, but it's something that doesn't always happen in tech, and in fact doesn't often happen in tech.
No. I really like John Vervaeke's approach to this, and the cool thing is he has a very strict, I guess philosophical and scientific approach to it. And he kind of always talks about how you shouldn't kind of confuse the properties of the theory with the properties of the thing that the theory is about, And so like your theory of vagueness doesn't need to be vague. And so there is you can really distinguish the two things. And he talks about relevance realization, or I mean, I don't know, that's a whole rabbit hole. But for example, if we take evolution, it's the process through which fittedness comes about, right? But fittedness cannot be defined objectively because it depends on the context, it depends on a number of things, right? There is no absolute fittedness. But the process through which it comes about can actually be described quite precisely. And so, and like something that he talks about in an interesting way is that there are different kinds of knowing. So, and this kind of thing that we are engaging in is propositional knowing. But then there are deeper, like more embodied forms of knowing, and the most embodied is participatory knowing. Like he talks about them as different ways to be connected to reality, right? One is through truth, but like the last one would be through attunement, right? Being attuned to reality. And so, yeah, like the propositional part, it seems like one can get there through reason, through rational arguments, that there's a limit there, that those won't bring you further, and then you just need to kind of participate and sense it. And so I guess it's exactly where you have these cultures that are delicate, that haven't been touched by, the very categorizing linear thinking. That it looks like one needs to be most tactful and less propositional, I guess.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting about like the participatory style is that it's very hard to do these days because we're kind of not always surrounded by nature, and we're not always surrounded by other humans. Like we can live a lot of our lives just in our bedroom or some shit, like so it's just like it's now like a very deliberate step to enter into that kind of participatory knowing of like humans and their relationship to the natural world and to each other and so on.
I just thought recently that I had this thought recently that because we're so disconnected from each other and nature, and we're kind of in this system. I mean, like, I don't know, like I live in a unit block with like probably 30 other people in this unit. I don't know their names. Like I don't think I don't think anyone knows their neighbors. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that's discussed in Game B could be solved like immediately, because they're basically social problems. Like if a bunch of people just got together and said, let's fucking grow food, like you could grow food. If a bunch of people got together and went, let's fucking house each other, you could house each other. But I feel like we're almost so cybernetic. We're such cyborgs now in this kind of capitalist system that we almost need technology as a mediator to get us back to those social connections. Like in some sense, we're almost so used to transactional with exchange-based interactions and also app-based like technology mediators that I feel like these peer-to-peer technologies are almost
or economy mediated, right?
Yeah. And it's almost like the point of these is to get us back to more community, tribal like cultures where we actually speak to each other and just solve the real problems. But the technology shouldn't be like a be-all end-all solution. It's just a bridge to get back to where we were before, because we don't speak to each other, we don't know our neighbors anymore, and we're in this cybernetic, cyborg, transactional dystopia. There's a random thought out recently.
I love it.
I often giggle to myself about this, of like the great joke of, the work is using the most advanced technology that humankind has ever developed just to show people what they already have, so they can throw the technology away and get back to it. Like, it's just such a joke. But it's what we have to do.
And it's hard, right?
Yeah, that's something I've been beginning to realize more and more, Nathan. I think it's very well summed up. Yeah, like all of this shit at the end of the day, it's like to design itself out, like that we don't need it anymore.
It's so funny, like the first reactions are all resistance to all of this, like first question, like how would it scale, and then like I don't want to be naive about it as well, right? But it is true, like for me this year has all been about kind of like changing the priorities so much, like okay, no, wait, family first. And it took me so much to actually say, like really take that seriously. What does it mean to take family first and this stuff second? Even my online friends after that, and then my public Twitter profile after that, and I'm still struggling, like tend to take it all backwards. Suddenly my public profile is the most important thing, but it's actually the last. It's the least important thing. Yeah, it's so hard. It's like a black hole, like sucking us in that thing.
Yeah.
Back to why we need peer-to-peer sovereignty and all of that.
Yeah, just to loop it back, speaking of black holes, like what you were saying, Marcus, about it needing to be kind of an intentional step to embrace, a more embedded, integrated lifestyle. Like I was living in an eco village for a couple of years up until the start of this year, so that's obviously been kind of intentional for me, although that was sort of an accident. But
accidental community, yeah.
Accidental community, yeah. It does feel to me though. I haven't really. I want to write it up at some point. I haven't articulated it yet, but the paradigm shift as someone working with agent-centric tech. I think this term is becoming widespread enough we can actually use it now. That seems to have a certain push to it that kind of leads you in this direction. Mm-hmm. Like just in the change of mindset and the change of thinking. Like there was a big shift cognitively going from being a web developer to a blockchain developer, because suddenly everything was public by default. And so the mindset of like, we're going to take your data and hoard it and extract money from it was no longer relevant. And that was huge for me. Like even in companies where I'd work with really well-meaning bosses, like convincing your boss not to record everything about everything is a really difficult job. But then going from blockchain to holochain and moving from like a world where data is absolute and there's a truth to a world where data is, completely subjective and there's no truth at all, really in a lot of ways forces you to kind of be pushed down into seeing yourself as a user of that system, because you're sort of forced to see the system from the perspective of every user as you go and designing it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's something that does to you that starts to make you realize that there's other connections and beings out there that all have deeper things to offer you than just some money for doing a thing for them.
True, yeah. The fact that you're a participant suddenly becomes,
Yeah, and like all the ethical stuff and things I'm having to kind of do organizational design now is sort of all an artifact of that, because once you're in that, you can no longer really ignore those things, because otherwise you just end up being a hypocrite doing unethical stuff that you haven't thought through, kind of thing. Like it's a good set of incentives.
Yeah, and also the other part, right? The fact that suddenly you have multiple tools that to use the same data, right? And one is maybe more addictive, and the other is less addictive, and suddenly you can pick which one you want, right? Like and you're not forced anymore to use the most addictive one because it's the only way to access your data. The network effects will be turned inside out, right? Suddenly. I was thinking before when we were talking about, maybe we just need to leave. There is this saying, right? Like, what if there was a war and no one showed up, right? Like, what if there was a new day on the internet and no one showed up? Maybe that's that's the thing.
It's not going to happen.
That's always the way to smash capitalism, is if everyone just decide not to turn up to work. Capitalism finishes.
Yeah.
But no one wants to do that because they're too scared. Yeah.
Like Daniel Schmachtenberger, just to say like to put a bit of a challenge on the economic side. He thinks the solution is not going to be game theoretic. I mean, what we need to do is to remove all perverse incentives, yes, but then to do the right thing, people will have to actually have the choice to do it. No incentives. People will have to choose it, and that's a high bar. It's this idea. Jamie Will said it. No one is going to snatch the ring. Like in the circle of Elrond. Like everyone has the incentive to, but nobody does it. Yeah. Maybe if we can, like actually
agree.
psychologically change. That's already wrong.
Yeah, I agree with him. I think it's possible. I hope we can get there. Like even what you were saying before, Nick, about like a bad incentive and then not doing it and creating a positive incentive out of that. To me, even that still feels like game theoretic-y, and I'm kind of, blockchain industry, right? So I'm kind of scarred from the game theory stuff, and I used to be a game developer as well.
Yeah.
But it's I just as a framing, I feel like there's an unequal power dynamic in it of like, I'm a game designer architecting all you pawns to make you jump through the hoops I want you to.
Yeah.
I just
The puppeteer.
I prefer the framing to be, I am this perspective, this is what you want to do, and you get it done. And maybe there's some game theory in there somewhere, but to me that feels more honest and less about game theory and more just about like what are people's needs we can meet.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm starting to see more, because as I'm engaging more in like stuff around Sydney of people trying to do like commons oriented solutions and projects and stuff, is it's like seeing what the communities actually, like what communities actually want and like what they want to try and achieve and make possible. And then I think that's a really interesting starting point, because there's already the intrinsic incentive there, like internal incentive there for them to do that, obviously. So you don't have to design in any incentives. It's like you just give them the tools to do that thing.
Yeah, even in the early days, I remember articulating Holochain's incentives in that way. Like Holochain doesn't have incentives; it has soft incentives. Like your incentive is you want to use the app. That's all you need.
Yeah. Like
So hard to
maybe
break
it's
people
really
out
like
of
sorry.
I was going to say it's so hard to break people out of the tokenization kind of meme of blockchain. Like everyone's just like tokenize, like add a quantity to it.
Yeah.
Make people chase that number. Yeah, and it's just so bad.
Yeah. Maybe it's true that, like on one hand you have the game theoretic part, and on the other hand you have actual agency, right? And maybe this is really the tension that we are navigating. Like we are actually going to a post-game theoretic world where people's agency is actually maximized, and so they are able to make good choices on their own. So.
Yes, someone sent me a TED talk recently. It was a designer talking about the future and game theory and stuff. It's just I was so sad to hear the audience applaud it. It's just the worst talk, and he's like on stage talking about, oh, we've already got the social internet and it's the best and it's called Facebook, and like that's what we should be using. Oh no.
How out of touch can you be?
Yeah, it was only like a year old too. Anyway.
Whoa. Okay.
But these are the forces we're in competition with.
Yeah.
Well, Ted just seems like a complete sellout, so I don't fucking. Yeah. Huh. I watched Ted for like a year and then gave up. Yeah.
You need edgier podcasts now.
It's a weird mind space we're in, or like scene or whatever, like cross section of scenes.
It's one of the more hilarious, interesting things about being on the fringe in weird places is that then you get like the people who are like really, really fringe intersecting with you, and like their crazy comes in. You're like, wow, that was a strange interaction.
Are you still on Secure Scuttlebutt, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't checked in a long time. I haven't had time, but yeah, I'm on there. Yeah. It's the place to have Game B discussions.
Oh yeah.
I was focused really recently on. Sorry.
Yeah.
I use Patch Bay.
Is that just like an Android app?
No, it's a desktop app. I don't use it on my phone. On Android, they only have Manyverse, and it's a pretty crap app. It just does people. It doesn't even let you click on a hashtag and look at all the posts in a channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I downloaded Manyverse when you suggested it, and I was like, I installed it, I got it on there, and then I'm like, okay, now what do I do?
Took some out.
How do I? It's like you're presented with an empty screen. It's like there's no one around you. I'm like, oh. Like I feel like someone needs to give a really simple like, here's how to get into Scuttlebutt, like a step by
Yeah.
step.
Well, if you go to the Scuttlebutt website, it tells you all that. It took me a while to
Yeah.
figure
You
it
need
out.
to know a few people.
does.
And, yeah.
It does, but it tells you it for a desktop app, not for a mobile app.
Right.
Okay.
And
I
it
think-
also tells you for like an older version of the shittier version of the desktop app.
I mean, that network was
not
actually
patch
quite
day,
fun
it's
to
like-
reverse
yeah.
engineer, to see, okay, in how many hops will I manage to get to the actual, the real deals in the network and so on. Well, it was actually
Yeah.
fun. But,
And I feel like I've only like joined half the network or something. I don't even know if I'm fully in
that's-
the Scuttlebutt, but yeah.
There might even be some islands that aren't connected to anyone.
yeah, we haven't talked much at the level of actual tools within that area, right? Which is what I'm most interested in, because I stopped using it when I started being in touch more with like two specific people, and we used a tool that I created, which is also, it's built on Gun, but it's also pretty unique because, I mean, it just has it's its own niche, because I haven't seen anything like it. It's basically, imagine like a Reddit, but the threads are like a chat, in the sense that they are just like lines of individual things, comments. And so it kind of facilitates, like, really just think out loud, don't edit your stuff, don't post like the post, there is no official this is my opinion. It's more like this, you just think out loud, and then people can highlight your things. And we have been using it, and it's amazing the amount of content we produced since August. Like, can scroll through these old threads, and also because it's really bare bones, there is no user concept, nothing, like you don't even know who wrote what. But we have been like, then there is maybe my thread where I write most of the stuff, and then people maybe interject some observations, but then there are more threads based on conversations. Has been, I mean, we need.
But anonymity sounds like an ingredient in the psychological safety of that. Would you say?
It's like a shared stream of consciousness.
It wouldn't work if people had names next to their posts.
Yeah.
So people wouldn't feel as free to post things.
Huh. It's interesting for my participants.
And even
What
like
do you think?
pseudonymous, if it's just Sorry,
for me it was never that important. But the people who joined me in using that, for them it was actually, they always said it was a big deal, this kind of like three-way anonymity. You don't know which one of the others wrote it, and I don't know. For me, I just found it funny, and for me it was just a missing feature, but apparently it is appreciated.
I do like the idea of having like, for every Reddit post, you could have like a static, like top level comment, or you could like create a new chat.
Mm-hmm.
So like you could have multiple chats under a post. So people could be having like different discussions simultaneously or whatever.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, the problem with things like Reddit is the explosion of complexity, right? Like each answer, because every answer can have answers and so on and so forth, you kind of have to keep track of everyone's answers, and like it grows, and at a certain point you just give up, right? But we are having, we are 4 people, and we are having kind of a linear thing, right? Where I have to sense the gestalt of the whole, and give like one answer that is kind of like that senses the unity, and give the best possible upgradient answer. And we are doing this work, and given that we cannot split out into sub discussions, we have to do another kind of work, which is kind of like this integration. And so there is a benefit to that kind of form of interaction where it's strictly linear, but obviously not for everything, right? I think we just need an explosion of all these things. Again, like interoperable. I mean, that's the frame of the whole conversation.
Well, it's interoperable yet diverse.
Yeah. It's like all the tools that want the like feature share the same like infrastructure beneath, right? and that principle we need to follow.
Yeah, dude, I'm loving, like, everyone's loving the apps that you're pumping out, Nick. It's just, yeah, it's just so good. Like, you've got Mark Nadal's energy as well. It's just like, play. just like create silly things and see what happens. Like, it's so good.
I'm happy to hear that, really, yeah, because I mean, generally don't hear feedback it's in person. So,
Yeah.
I love the iframe concept as well. Like just little iframe, modules on the page. It's kind of cool.
Haven't been posting stuff lately because I was sick, like with fever, and my child too, and my wife too. But I'm working to integrate security in all those tools, actually, like authenticated Kanbans where you cannot just go and edit stuff and then encrypted Kanbans. And so like just to add that layer by default then to all new tools as well.
Are you pulling out common framework stuff while you do that for just general use in other gun apps?
No, I'm making this up actually. I'm becoming quite opinionated, and so over time I will develop my own like wrapper library on top of it, with kind of like the best practices that I found to kind of rapidly prototype something, and because now it has been actually relatively easy with the kind of very minimal React setup and so on. But now if I want to introduce, resources can be secret or public but authenticated and so on, then you kind of need a lot of more logic that I don't want to kind of integrate in each individual app. So I think I will create kind of like a utility, like Nick's gun utils or something.
How does Gun have facility for like a local private store as well as a shared store? There's like two separate databases under the hood?
So local in the browser for sure.
Yeah.
Plus you can run your own server, and kind of like you define your starting peers, right, in the app.
It's more what I mean is in a holochain app you have like your local hash chain that only you have access to, but then you can selectively put things in the public shared DHT space to share them with other people. Does Gun have something similar, or if you want to do something local you just code it yourself in the browser local storage separately?
So like this optionality, there's no optionality about it, right? It's more like, okay, if you are connected, it will sync with all the peers that you are connected with. But assuming that you want to do something like offline first, or completely offline actually, basically then you have your own Gun node running in the browser, which has then like a persistence adapter, which can be local storage or it can be IndexedDB, and so this is the way you have to think about it. The node can run both on a server and in the client.
Yeah, but I think there's just one DHT space. I think.
Yes, I'm creating a lot of things that in the future will collide with other things, like Hello World. I guess it's going to be so polluted by the time in a few years, that data. But obviously, then if you want to start using it seriously, you would create secret entities, which by default actually contain the public key in the ID, so it becomes super long and nobody will ever collide with it anyway.
Yeah, I think this is what I discovered through a series of questions in their Discord. Was like, if you want stuff to not clash with other things, you kind of have to give every user their own graph, and then that's where you store all that data. So it's like it becomes agent centric if you want to make it like not clash with things.
It doesn't have to be, like I reverse engineer the user mechanism, and users in the end are nothing but other resources that have this kind of structured ID, right? That have the public key inside the ID, plus alias. So there is an alias system that links to these resources. But if you don't want any user concept, you can just create objects which have this public key inside the ID, and then every Gun node will basically validate data that is written on that node. You need to write it with signed with the related private key.
Right. So you just share it with whoever you want access.
Yeah, I mean, this is
Okay.
the pattern that I want to use, right? Basically, just a URL that contains the public key and the private key, and you send that,
I
right?
see. Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
and then obviously, if
Okay.
you want to make it readable but not writable, you would have to you would need another encryption key, but you can create links. So this is for throwaway resources that are a bit more secure than just anyone could access. These are the patterns that I'm interested in.
That
For quick collaboration, right?
that makes a lot of sense to me. That's cool. Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, I mean,
Oh, I gotta get my day moving, I think, guys.
okay, there is one thing I wanted to tell you before you run off. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
my hope is that I might one day manage to bridge towards your accounting world through tracking apps, because tracking is already useful on a personal productivity basis, right? Like I want to track the food that I eat, right? And then one day that food can become actual food data that has backstories, and then you can start calculating your carbon footprint and so on. And then I hope that there will be a bridge from the productivity collaboration world to this more like economic that stuff, right? And then hopefully by then we will be able to kind of bridge the holochain world and the gun world. So this is kind of my vision, but it's not so close.
Well, I do hope so. I actually, out of that Twitter thread, I reached out to Mark because we met earlier this year and was like, hey, we kind of half talked about this, but like it seems more relevant. Here's a whole bunch of information. You should just build an implementation. It'll take you like a weekend in Gun. So we'll see what happens.
Cool.
He did send me an email to say he's all caught up and incredibly busy at the moment. But
it's incredible, and I admire
I just
him
throw
so much.
ideas at him.
Yeah, I will let you go. So don't feel.
Sure. Thanks for the chat. It's very interesting.
It was fun. Thank you for joining.
No worries. Nice to meet you both.
Awesome.
Good to see you, Nathan.
Bye.
You too, man.
Yeah. See you, Pospi. Yeah.
I might head off too.
Yep.
This is awesome, guys.
All right.
You coming to Beers tonight, Marcus?
Tonight.
Do you all live in Australia or not? Or like, is that just my...
Nathan and I live in Sydney, and Pospi lives up north a little bit.
I think Brisbane area. Although he's always moving around,
Cool.
Tonight, I don't like who's coming. What's it about?
Free beers.
Oh.
I'll message her.
Oh, is this the? Hang on. Is this the Atlassian thing or?
Yeah, it's just my mates that are lucky to have free beers.
Okay, are they cool?
Yeah, they're cool.
Okay. All right, I'll try to come. Yeah. What time? It's like.
Okay, cool. Or something. Yeah. What time is it over there, Nick?
Send me it.
Must be like 11 or something now.
It's 20 to midnight.
Crazy. It's only like 9:30 here.
So cool. Well, then I wish you a good day, and we'll hear each other on Twitter.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Hopefully this recorded all right.
Yeah, let's
check the OBS thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Catch you.
Bye.
Cool.
Yeah.
See you, Nathan. I can hang around for a little bit.
Okay.
I'm just chilling.
All right. Yeah, I really... Can you say something?
Hello.
Okay, yeah. I mean, because last time I recorded something with OBS, it only recorded my audio. That was so
okay.
shitty.
Yeah, thank God.
But it looks like your audio is being recorded too, so I hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really drawn to your like the worse is better concept that you showed me. I think it's like it's a recurring theme now where it's like, because I'm like not the best developer at all. Like I've just started out like learning web development, so I've only got like a year of self-teaching, and I'm not really good at actually completing projects or anything. So and a large part of that is because I'm just using really heavy tools like Holochain, and I'm like, like I have to learn like really sophisticated languages like Rust and stuff, and I'm like, I'm kind of stretching myself super thin across lots of different tools and languages and stuff that aren't really mastering any single one. But yeah, but then it's like when I see something like Gun, I'm like, oh, I know how to use it. Like I can do that. So it's just yeah, like things can like yeah. I'm drawn to really easy to use technologies. But I know that's also like, but I'm also very concerned and always appreciating like, or like, what am I losing by choosing this technology? Like, because I
Yeah.
know it's not right if it's too easy. Like, I feel like the easier it is, the less confident I feel in like it being a good solution. Yeah.
I guess it's a question of what your calling is, right? Like, so given that for me it's like at the higher level of the stack, I actually want to develop tools that I can experiment with and communicate with other people. And I don't care too much about the backend part, you know, or let's say that aspect. For me, I could easily switch. I'm not that opinionated about it, right? I could easily switch it with something else if it proves itself to be better. For me, ease of use right now, for that reason, is the highest priority, right? But if you kind of like feel that that's the area that is really like, you know, where you want to learn, well, I don't know. It's also a question, you know, maybe the thing that you are meant to do is not the thing that you're doing now, but something that in a few years will build on the skills that you are building now by doing the thing that is most interesting to you. I don't know.
Mm.
I mean, learning to develop Rust, for example, doesn't seem like wasted time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I feel like I am a perfectionist at heart, so it's like hard to like I think like I very much appreciate the kind of hacking together style, but I think I'm learning more and more that that isn't me. Like
Yeah.
I don't do that. I'm more like I want to like get something that it already exists, like that something's hacked to someone's hacked together and then turn it into like a very robust and resilient thing
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like you don't have to maintain and like so on, like just like perfecting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
think
cool.
that's kind of cool. So I think that's why I'm drawn to things like kind of holochain and Scepter versus like Gun,
Yeah.
or any blockchain stuff or whatever, because it's like it's just not like it's not perfect. So yeah.
Yeah. The beauty, or like it's an aesthetic also, right? Or
Right. Yes.
but you know, I think, or I'm not. I don't want to be arrogant. It's just that this kind of reminds me of the way I was feeling a few years ago. I was feeling like frustrated that I'm perfectionistic, but in a different way. You know, like I just I started a startup that went nowhere. It took me 2 years to develop a product because I was always reevaluating the stack and always questioning everything, and all of that, you know, like once on one side gave me the skills that now I use every day at work, but also really the last couple of weeks with these tools, being able to develop one tool a day, that was not possible before. You know, it's like something clicked after all these years
Right.
of like not being happy with what I did and like re-examining, re-evaluating, like going, you know, like making choices and evaluating stuff. And suddenly I ended up with something that just allows me to like basically think things into being. Like that's how it was feeling.
Right.
Like I was 1 week and a half, just like every day, like poop, poop, poop. and I was surprised of myself. And it has not always been like that. I've really like, again, as I said, like
Okay.
2 years to develop a product.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but I'm not saying
Yeah.
it is the same situation.
No, that's good. Yeah, that's helpful. Like just knowing that, yeah, like that wasn't just something that you were always capable of.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe you're still putting in your
Yeah.
10,000 hours, you know, and then suddenly, like, you will find yourself in the place where just like, for everyone else, it will be magic, and you have been working on it.
Exactly. Yeah. No, yeah, it's like the idea that like someone who's like who spent like decades learning to play an instrument or something, and then it's like, yeah, like they play one song and everyone goes, oh wow, that was a good song, and it's like that took me
Yeah.
like 30 years to play that song. Like it's 30 years of effort right there. Yeah.
I don't know if you are familiar with Meteor.
No.
Okay, it's a web framework that I
Oh,
went.
Material.
No,
Yeah.
Meteor.
No.
Meteor.
A Meteor? No, I
Yeah,
don't.
okay. I mean, it was back in 2016 when I was working on this startup. I went into that, and I had a kind of like a similar story than with Holochain. You know, like I went deep into it, learned all the patterns, and after a while, I got frustrated because it was not the tool for what I wanted to accomplish, and so I kind of like very difficultly climbed back out of it, and and so yeah, this is all. I could have just like taken my crappy website and put it online, and it would have been done earlier. But yeah, I guess
Yeah. Yeah.
it's one's path.
Yeah, I think like lately I've just been distancing myself from building anything in Holochain because it's just kind of not ready yet. So I'm just like want to see it ready and then start hacking away.
But Pospi seemed to be able to use it in communities. Is that wrong? Or how is he able to do it?
I don't think it's being used yet. No, but my impression is that he's got the kind of the developer set up that he's able to like he feels confident that he knows how it's working and stuff. But it's like I'm more like I kind of need to see it to believe it. Like I just don't trust the development tools, like the development kit. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I mean, it's not my deepest point. The deepest point is what I made in my document. But one of the big worries that I have about the whole approach is versioning. Like what if they want to create a patch to whatever app or protocol? Like the day they launch Holo, the stack that they are launching, and they are assuming that it's perfect, right? That it's like a big a crystal that is like everything is working, the money, the key system, and everything. That they tested it enough. I mean, if you know reality about development, the day after they will discover a bug, and then what do you do? Like, do they have a plan for that? Will that work?
Well, like they have talked many times about like that they've acknowledged that there will be bugs after day one, So yeah, yeah, my understanding is that they're thinking about it, and like they've got very good developers on board, so like that I've met. So, but yeah, I personally don't have any idea, but I know for actual apps like Holochain apps, that they're building in a version control system and like a data migration system. So if you update an application, there's a way to migrate people up to a new version and bring their data across.
Yeah.
And it's like you can make that a very smooth process actually. So it's like they just load up. It's like they run the app and then the app self installs like the new version. So like so the app itself is the installer for a new version of that app. So it's like it's kind of like a module that you need to include in whatever app you make that it has this ability to bootstrap itself.
That sounds good. Yeah. And then
but like Holochain itself, it's like because I know like things like IPFS have had problems where it's like you go to the URL and like the hash thing, and then it's like, oh, it's like not loading, and then you slowly realize that I just have an earlier version of IPFS, and then you just update and then it works, and it's like most people just don't know that, like it's not easy, so then you end up just relying on the like for more reliability, you're just relying on the public gateways for IPFS, so you just go to ipfs.io/the hash. So it's because that those things are going to be up to date, but then people just aren't going to are actually installing it locally because they don't know whether they'll have reliability there. So
Yeah.
yeah,
What
it's
do
kind
you
of weird.
want to build?
What do I want to build? Well, I mean, I could say like what I've been kind of working on, but like more and more, I'm just like kind of losing passion for it. But I think it's still worthy, but like a worthy goal. But I'm trying to build this thing called Omni, which you might have heard about. Um, the Omni project is the broader thing, but it's about trying to like have an alternative for the scholarly publishing model. So the idea of scholars being able to share work directly with each other in like an open network, and still performing all the same functions that they do for publishers anyway, like editing and peer review, and all those kind of assessments and stuff. Um, but just without the the publisher just making a fuckload of money by whoever accesses the articles or whatever. So, yeah, and like publishers are just like they are. It's fairly unclear what value they actually provide in the whole scholarly communication system. So it's just me kind of questioning that role and then just seeing what can I make that there are like what do I need to do to a point where there are users who are like, yeah, this works for us. Like I get my scholarly content out there, I get recognized, like it's validated by other peers.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you know
it's
people in
like
the
that's
scientific community?
yeah. I'm a physics
Oh,
graduate
okay, okay.
from Sydney. Yeah, so yeah. So it's like it's this is kind of be a process of me being like, fuck that system. I don't want to like play that game. And so I'm just like not interested in doing research yet until I kind of have built the system that I want to be able to
Uh-huh.
publish through. So it's more like this is how I would publish stuff, and it makes so much more sense. So yeah,
Imagine
I
if
don't
you
know.
end up, you know, like writing your results in a paper that gets published on an old style paper on a journal.
Well, I mean, like I have published an article like for an undergrad thing in yeah, in a normal journal, like it happens. I think it's an yeah, I think it's an open access journal. But then it's like we had to pay. Like, it's called Gold Open Access. So you have to like pay to get your article published, and you pay like thousands of dollars or some shit. It's like $2,000 just to publish an article. It's like, and that all adds up for universities and stuff. And then the libraries that have to like buy huge ass journals of like all these papers just because someone requested that they want to see one article.
I see.
That stuff is so dumb.
There is an aspect that you
But
haven't
I'm
addressed
pretty. I'm
yet that I'm wondering. Like my wife,
yeah.
my wife is a biochemist. I mean, she has a PhD, and from what I hear, for them, like publishing in the big journals is everything. Like that's their whole you know cost for living. They like if they have zero interest in publishing in some other system, you know, because it's all about where they are able to go next based on where they published. And so, well, like, how
Yeah.
are you going to break that system? That's my question. I don't know if you have an answer.
Well, my approach to that so far is kind of getting people questioning why getting in big journals matters. Because it's just kind of like it's almost it's like it's a bit like I see it as like a kind of potential for a crash in the sense that people realize that getting in the big journals, like it's kind of just everyone imagining that that's a good thing, but it like doesn't really correlate with it being a good paper. Like there's a lot of data out there that's like correlating like the like multiple values that you can get out of a paper versus what journal it got in, and it's like it's a very flat distribution like across all the levels of journals. So it's like just because you got in the top one, it has no correlation with whether it's actually like a significant paper.
Okay, but does it correlate well with the career that you're going to have? That
it does.
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the problem, right?
So
It's still in your interest.
it's just like, yeah, but it's like it's a proxy to like assessing people's capability as a scientist. So it's more like, well, if that's what you want to know, like how capable are they as a scientist? Like, do they do good science? Well, then let's just measure if they do good science.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like what you start doing is you actually measure whether they're following like the scientific methodology, like consistently and doing stuff robustly, and if they're doing everything right. And so even if they're getting results which are really boring and like null results and stuff, the measurements about them are clearly showing that they're doing good science, like they're doing it properly. They're like adhering to the epistemology in a sense. So, and I think that's all that should really matter at the end of the day. And it's like, because people all scientists know that getting a novel result is very like lucky most of the time. But then it's the people who come across the novel results that all fame and glory. So, it's just like a luck system in many ways. It's like being at the right space at the right time. And it's like, as long as you've asked sufficiently good questions and gone about the analysis sufficiently well, like that's what can give you the chance to get a novel result. But there's a lot of people who don't. Like a lot of people who get completely unrecognized because their whole career they never really discovered anything interesting. So, but they were the whole time they were doing good science. They were doing it properly, and in many cases we're probably doing it better because there's lots of novel results which turn out to be false. So, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I kind of but then like the more I've been venturing into Game B, I'm just like not really caring about science as usual. Like doing like knowledge gathering as usual. And I think like, yeah, like priorities in terms of what knowledge should be acquired or people should know about. It's like, it doesn't happen at the abstract level anymore. I just feel like what matters now is like people understanding how nature works and their relationship with nature and with each other, and like you're saying, through the embodied knowing. So and like some scholarly publishing platform is not going to solve the participatory knowing about nature and relationships and stuff. So
yeah,
I just don't really care.
So, I mean, this project, I
Yeah.
assume you're doing part-time, right?
It's kind of been a hobby project, yeah. But it's like most of the time it's kind of on the back seat while I'm just learning to code more generally.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, like I like start of the year I mocked up a very basic prototype, like extremely basic. It's just like just an IO for uploading like articles, but it's just like a HTML input form. Like it's not anything special. But it's just like, it's just meant to be really basic proof of concept that you could do that with Holochain. Yeah, at the moment I'm just like, I don't have a particular project in mind, or thing I'm really trying to achieve. I guess I've kind of had a bit of a burnout as regarding coding. Actually, I just been taking a break, but like I want to get back into it and have fun coding again because I just don't find it enjoyable right now.
Yeah.
But I think but some of the stuff you've been doing has like been directly inspiring me because I'm like, I would yeah, I just kind of want to.
I saw your
have
tweet
it
like
more
my life
playful.
decisions were more easy before this tweet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because gun, I was like, fuck, this thing's so easy to use. Like, I just want to use it now. So, yeah. I mean, yeah, but like this discussion sort of clarified that question actually, which is nice. Yeah, with Pospi and stuff, sort of like where holochain kind of fits in the picture. But yeah, I kind of just want to play more.
Yeah.
And what you're doing, and I just like, yeah, but I don't have a billion ideas like you do, so I guess I can just crowdsource that stuff. But
Yeah. For me, it's actually.
and I think I think quite big as well, so
Yeah.
I just kind of need it.
So you don't think incrementally?
No, but I think that's the whole kind of point of like what we're learning here is if we want interoperable diversity kind of stuff, like you need to start small with little Lego blocks that kind of can be played around with. Yeah.
I guess the big thinking and the small thinking are both involved, right? You need to kind of work at it from both sides. Yeah. It's midnight here, so I think I'm going to go to sleep.
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah.
I think I'm going to post these, unlisted on YouTube, and then we can share it with people.
Sure.
The people we find it relevant.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Anyway, yeah.
There are a lot of common values, and so I'm happy that that's going on. That somehow we all ended up here in parallel without needing to form a consensus,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Then maybe I will have you as a tester of some kind of tool at a certain point.
Shoot me anything. I'm happy to play with it. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. And yeah, I think I've got access to your code base, like your GitHub stuff.
Yeah.
Nick.
That's good. All right, then wish you a good day.
Yeah. Yeah. See you, Nick. Have a good one.
Bye-bye, Marcus.
See ya.